Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking a stack of sources that, quite frankly, reads a little bit like the script for a gothic horror movie.
It really does.
We've got Victorian asylums, penal colonies on the literal edge of the world, quarantine stations, phantom hitchhikers. It's a very specific flavor of history we're looking at today.
It's sort of the greatest hits of Southern Hemisphere darkness, isn't it?
Yeah.
But what I appreciate about this particular deep dive is that we aren't just, swapping ghost stories. We're not sitting around a campfire trying to scare each other.
Exactly. The mission today is to look at the why. Why do these specific places like Aradale Mental Hospital, Port Arthur, the North Head Quarantine Station, why do they become these absolute epicenters for legends? Is it just because bad things happen there, or is there something in the actual architecture, maybe the geology, or even the bureaucracy that kind of breeds these stories?
That is the key question. We aren't here to hunt ghosts. We're here to hunt the history that created them. And when you look at the research, a very clear theme emerges. These aren't just spooky old buildings. They are institutions of isolation.
Isolation by design.
Precisely. Whether it was for mental health, criminal punishment, or disease control, the main function of every single place we're discussing was to remove a person from the group.
To take them and just put them away.
Right. And the sources really suggest that when you design a building specifically to control and to separate and to silence people, you leave a psychological mark that just outlasts the brick and mortar.
So let's start with that brick and mortar. We're going to Victoria, Australia, to look at two massive institutions, the Aradale Mental Hospital in Ararat and the Beechworth Asylum. And the first thing that struck me in the reading was just the sheer scale of these places. I think we have a tendency to think of an old hospital as just one big building, but Aradale was described as a town within a town.
That's a very deliberate design choice. It's known as the E-plan barracks style, which was modeled after an asylum in England, Colney Hatch. The whole philosophy was self-sufficiency.
Right.
I mean, Aradale operated from 1865 all the way to 1998. That's over 130 years. And for most of that time, they had their own vineyards, piggeries, orchards, market gardens, everything.
Which, if you sort of squint, sounds almost idyllic, like a self-sustaining commune or something.
On paper, maybe. But you have to look at the intent. The intent wasn't lifestyle. It was containment. By making the institution self-sufficient, the state basically eliminated the need for the outside world to come in.
And, more importantly, eliminated any reason for the patients to go out.
Exactly. It creates this hermetically sealed society where the normal rules of the world just don't apply.
And that separation leads us to one of the most fascinating and, frankly, manipulative architectural details in these notes, the ha-ha wall.
Oh, yeah.
When I first read that term, I thought it was a typo or a joke.
It does sound ridiculous, doesn't it?
Right.
But it's this brilliant, if cruel, piece of landscape engineering. The sources describe it at both Aradale and Beechworth.
So how did it work?
Well, if you're a member of the public standing outside the asylum looking in, the wall looks low, maybe waist height. It doesn't look like a prison wall at all. It preserves this nice view of the gardens.
So it comforts the public. It tells the townspeople, don't worry, this isn't a jail. It's a benevolent place of healing.
Exactly. It manages public perception. But if you're a patient on the inside, the reality is terrifyingly different. The wall is built into a trench. So from your perspective, you're looking at a steep, vertical face of brick that's impossible to climb.
Wow.
It effectively traps you. But to the outside observer, the barrier is almost invisible.
That is such a perfect metaphor for the whole Victorian attitude toward mental health. Hide the unpleasantness, but make it look polite. It's gaslighting built right into the landscape.
It is deceit by design. And that trap wasn't just physical, it was bureaucratic. This is where the horror aspect really kicks in for me.
Yeah.
We found data on the admission versus discharge rules at Beechworth. To strip a person of their freedom and commit them, you essentially only needed 2 signatures.
2 signatures to get in, but looking at the discharge protocols, it took 8 signatures to get out.
Correct. It was, statistically and bureaucratically 4 times harder to leave than to arrive. And that's assuming you could even get that process started. There's a sticky nature to these places. Once you're in the system, the inertia just keeps you there.
And for some, staying there meant J Ward.
J Ward is the darkest corner of the Aradale complex. There's an old gold rush jail, just cold, hard stone that they converted into a ward for the criminally insane.
And the sources say it was meant to be a temporary measure.
Temporary solutions that last for decades. Yeah, it operated for generations.
Yeah.
You had people living in stone cells designed for 1850s prisoners right up into the modern era.
That kind of suffering, layered over decades, absorbed into the walls, you can understand why people feel a heaviness there.
It's exactly the kind of fuel that powers local legends.
So we have the physical isolation of the asylum. Now, I want to pivot to a different kind of isolation. We're moving south to Tasmania, to the Port Arthur Penal Colony. This wasn't just about walls. This was about geography.
Port Arthur is iconic because it was marketed as the inescapable prison. It sits on the Tasman Peninsula, which is connected to the mainland by this tiny, narrow strip of land called Eagle Hawk Neck.
Which is a natural choke point. The sources mention the dog line.
Yes, a line of savage dogs chained across the isthmus to alert the guards if anyone tried to sneak across. And of course, the administration was very happy to spread the rumor that the waters were infested with sharks.
Which, to be fair, is a pretty effective deterrent. If I hear sharks, I'm not swimming, even if it's just a rumor.
Right.
But looking at the materials, the real nightmare at Port Arthur wasn't the sharks or the dogs. It was the shift in philosophy from physical punishment to something else.
The silence system. This is where we see the influence of the philosopher Jeremy Bentham and his idea of the panopticon. The thinking was you could control people through the mind rather than just the body.
And they built the separate prison at Port Arthur specifically for this. The details here are just chilling. Prisoners were hooded whenever they were moved so they couldn't see another human face.
And they were forbidden to speak. It was total sensory deprivation. The theory was moral reformation. The idea was that if you sat in absolute silence, you'd reflect on your crimes, you'd look inward, and you'd find God.
But we know now what happens to the human brain in solitary confinement. You don't find God.
You lose your mind. It breaks you. You don't get reformation, you get psychosis. The tragedy of Port Arthur is that they replaced the lash with silence, thinking it was more humane. But they drove so many men insane that they eventually had to build an asylum right next door to house the men they had broken.
Talk about a closed loop. You create the problem and then build a building to house it. And it wasn't just hardened criminals, was it? The sources mention Point Pier.
Point Pier was the first dedicated boys' prison in the British Empire. We're talking about convicts as young as 9 years old. 9? Yeah. They were separated from the adults, supposedly to learn trades like stone cutting. But these were children living hard, labor-intensive lives on a desolate rock at the bottom of the world.
And when they died?
They went to the Isle of the Dead. It's a small island just off the coast. There are 1,646 recorded graves there. But if you visit today, you'll only see about 180 headstones.
Let me guess, the headstones aren't for the convicts.
No, they're for the staff, the military, their families. The convicts were buried anonymously. It's the ultimate erasure. First, the silent system takes your voice. Then the grave takes your name.
That erasure of identity, it seems to be the ghost story itself. It's why people claim to hear voices there, because those people were denied one in life. It feels like the legend is trying to compensate for the history.
That's a profound way to put it. And that theme of stratification, of who gets a headstone and who doesn't, follows us to our next location. We're heading back to Sydney Harbor, to the North Head Quarantine Station.
Now, this place feels different. It wasn't a prison. It was a medical facility designed to save the colony from smallpox, cholera, the Spanish flu. It operated from 1832 all the way to 1984. But looking at the notes, it seems the virus wasn't the only thing determining your fate.
North Head is a fascinating case study because it perfectly mirrored the class system of the outside world. You would think, in the face of a deadly epidemic, everyone would be treated equally, right? Biology is the great equalizer.
But no, we've got first, second, and third class precincts.
Strictly enforced. If you were a first-class passenger, you had comfortable quarters, better food, you were merely inconvenienced. If you were third class, you were crowded into barracks behind high fences. And then there was the racial segregation.
The Asiatic quarters.
Yes. Non-European passengers were separated entirely, often with significantly worse conditions. So even in quarantine, your social status dictated your comfort. But what I love about North Head is that the people there, they fought back against that erasure. They left evidence.
The inscriptions. I was looking at the photos in the source deck. These aren't just scratches.
Oh, they're elaborate. The sandstone cliffs are covered in them. Over 1,000 carvings. Some are just names and dates recording the ship they arrived on. Others are poems, laments, messages to loved ones.
It's like 19th century graffiti, but with so much more weight. It's a declaration of existence. I was here. I mattered. Don't forget me.
And that emotional pouring, that intense need to be remembered, brings us right to the paranormal side of our deep dive. Because there's a theory that links these carvings and the geology of these places to the ghost stories.
You're talking about the stone tape theory.
I am. It's a concept that gained traction in the 70s, but its roots go way back to Victorian thinkers.
So, for the listener who hasn't spent time on ghost hunting forums, what's the elevator pitch for the stone tape?
The basic idea is that high-intensity emotions, fear, agony, despair, can be recorded onto the environment, specifically into the building materials. Think of the silica in sandstone acting like a magnetic tape.
So, a ghost isn't a conscious spirit walking around thinking, ooh, I'm going to scare someone. It's just a replay, like a hologram.
Exactly, it's a residual recording. That explains why in so many reports, the ghost never interacts with the living. It walks down the same hallway through the same wall. It's a loop. It's history on repeat.
And look at our locations. Aradale is massive brick and limestone. North Head is sitting on giant sandstone cliffs. If you buy into the theory, these are high-fidelity recording studios for trauma.
Sandstone specifically is often cited because of its high quartz content quartz being used in everything from watches to radios. It's an attractive pseudoscientific explanation.
But we promised a deep dive, which means we have to look at the hard science too. If it's not a recording in the rock, what is it?
Well, there are environmental factors. One is infrasound.
This is the frequency thing, right?
Yes. Sound frequencies below 19 hertz. They're too low for our ears to consciously hear, but your body still perceives them. And when we're exposed to them, we experience physiological symptoms, shivering, anxiety, and even the feeling of a presence in the room.
So a drafty old asylum with long corridors could basically become a giant infrasound organ.
It's very possible. It's vibrating your eyeballs.
Literally.
Literally. Infrasound can cause the fluid in the eye to oscillate, which creates peripheral visual disturbances. You see a shadow move out of the corner of your eye, but it's actually a physical reaction to sound.
That is wild. And there's one more theory in the stack that I love, haunted house syndrome and carbon monoxide.
This is the work of toxicologist Albert Donne. He argues that many Victorian hauntings were actually cases of chronic carbon monoxide poisoning from leaky gas lamps.
And the symptoms of CO poisoning.
Hallucinations, paranoia, dread, confusion. You're not seeing a ghost. You're slowly suffocating. It reframes all those stories of the mad woman in the attic. She might have just had a leaky gas fitting.
So we have the stone tape for the romantics and carbon monoxide for the skeptics. But there's one category of haunting in our sources that doesn't fit either of those. It's not about a building. It's about the road.
The transient hauntings, the phantom hitchhiker.
This seems to be a global thing. The notes list examples from everywhere. The A38 in England, the N9 in South Africa.
Even here in Sydney, on the Wakehurst Parkway, the legend of Kelly. The story goes that if you drive the parkway alone at night, she slips into the back seat. Or worse, takes control of the steering.
But why roads? If the stone tape theory relies on a building to record the energy, how does a ghost stick to a highway?
I think this speaks more to the psychology of the liminal space. A road is a place of transition. You aren't home and you aren't at your destination. You're in between.
And roads are high risk. Tragedies happen there suddenly.
Exactly. If you look at folklore, the concept of unfinished business is central. A sudden, violent death on a lonely stretch of road is the ultimate interruption. The journey never ended. So the cultural narrative places the spirit there, forever trying to get home.
It's interesting that in the asylum, the horror is that you can't leave. On the road, the horror is that you can't arrive.
That's a brilliant distinction. It really highlights how our fears manifest differently, depending on the setting.
So we've covered a lot today. We've dissected the architecture of control with the ha-ha walls, the psychological torture of the silent system, and the class divides at North Head.
It really reinforces the idea that these ghost stories are, well, they're functional. Whether you believe in the paranormal or not, the ghost story acts as a preservative for history.
How so?
Well, without the ghost story, would we still be talking about the specific layout of the separate prison? Or the conditions in the third-class quarantine quarters? The legend forces us to look at the history. It forces us to acknowledge the suffering. These locations are haunted by history, first and foremost.
The ghost is just the delivery system.
That's it. The ghost story is the wrapper. The history is the pill. It ensures we don't look away from the things that made us uncomfortable in the past.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave the listener with one thought that came up when we were discussing the stone tape theory.
Okay.
We talked about walls recording high emotion moments. If that theory holds even a grain of truth, look around where you are right now. Your office, your living room.
Oh, I don't like where this is going.
If our walls are recording us, what moments from today, from our modern lives, are being etched into the stone for a ghost hunter to find in 100 years? Are we leaving behind anything worth haunting?
That is a terrifying thought.
Huh?
Hopefully it's not just us recording this deep dive.
We can only hope. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.
See you next time.